Today we will consider a story about a woman who wanted to remain unnoticed after meeting two lovers at once. Earlier, I thought that the more love you show, the more attention you give, the more you satisfy all her desires, the more the woman in your life realizes how lucky she is to have you. I don't think so anymore. Now I believe all these things are just making her take you for granted. They are making her think there is nothing she can do without you noticing or making excuses for her. Lena and I met in our freshman year of college. We started dating, and until the end of our first year, we were in an on and off relationship. We both seemed to really like each other and enjoyed the sex we were having, but neither of us was at the point where we wanted to be in a committed relationship. Halfway through our senior year, we met again, and this time we stayed together. 6 months after finishing school, we got married. Soon after, my parents celebrated their 25th wedding anniversary, and during the party, I found my father alone. I asked him how he and my mother managed to stay happy with each other for so long. I pointed out several couples we knew who couldn't seem to go a week without fighting over something. "How do you and Mom manage not to be like everyone else?" I asked. "The secret, son, is to tell them every day that you love them. Show them every day that you love them. Never let yourself get to the point where you take it for granted that they know this. Always show it every day of your marriage. It is so simple." I took his advice to heart, and for the next 7 years, not a day went by that I didn't tell Lena I loved her. I never forgot a birthday, anniversary, or any other special event. I even had a list of anniversaries that I used as an excuse to give cards, flowers, and other special gifts. I sent Lena flowers to celebrate her first anniversary of making meatloaf and using our new washer and dryer for the first time. I gave her a card for the anniversary of her first promotion at work. No event was too big or too small for me to record and use. She received flowers and chocolates on the anniversary of the first time we had sex. She received diamond earrings in honor of the first time we were intimate. I sent flowers to her office for no reason, just so that in the middle of the workday, she would receive a card that said, "I love you." I did everything I could think of to show her how much she meant to me. I followed my father's advice, but my father used his relationship with my mother as an example. He did not take into account the fact that different women look at the same thing differently. While my mother saw this as a sign of constant love, Lena saw it as a sign of my insecurity and that I was doing this to beg for her attention. Somehow, my desire to show her my love devalued me in her eyes. I, of course, didn't know this and moved on with my life knowing that I had a happy and loving marriage. Lena and I were successful in our chosen fields. We were both climbing the corporate ladder, and as we progressed, the work required more time, more energy, quite a few late nights, and occasional business travel. There were nights when we didn't even see each other. I would work late, and Lena would be asleep when I got home, or vice versa. I accepted this as the price we paid for success, and I assumed Lena did too. When we were together, I did everything possible to compensate for the time spent apart. The sex was amazing, and there were weekends when we didn't even get dressed. Lena smiled, told me that she was mine forever, and I, of course, believed it. I found out about this at a Christmas party in her company. It took place at a hotel in the city center. Her company rented a ballroom and several rooms to use as guest suites. The party was on a Wednesday night, and I told Lena I'd meet her there. The party started at 7 o'clock, but I had an out-of-town client I had to put on an 8 o'clock flight, so I told Lena not to wait until 8:30 or so. At the last minute, the client decided to stay an extra day and see the sights, so I arrived at the party at 7:30. I walked into the ballroom just in time to see Lena with a man I didn't recognize. But back then, I didn't know most of the people she worked with, having only seen them at picnics and Christmas parties. What I found strange was that Lena wrapped her arms around his waist. I headed towards the corridor they had entered, and upon entering it, I found that it was a kind of vestibule from which 3 rooms branched off. I wondered which room they went into, so I tried the one closest to me and found it empty, as was the room next to it. I was just about to close the door and go into the 3rd room when I heard giggling. It seemed to be coming from inside the room, even though it looked empty, so I went back inside to take a closer look. I heard another chuckle and realized it was coming from the vent in the ceiling. Then it dawned on me that I could hear what was happening in the next room. I walked towards the door to go into the next room when I heard Lena say, "Be careful, you don't want to tear your dress, do you? So how the hell am I supposed to get to your charms here? Let me show you." "Damn it, Lena. I will never get tired of looking at these beauties. Let me lick those fantastic mounds on your breasts." "Oh no, lover. Only after you get my toy. You can't play with my charms until I can play with your toy." There was the sound of a zipper being pulled up, and then Lena said, "Now there's something I'll never get tired of. Are you sure we don't have time to run into one of the rooms for a quickie? I need you very, very badly. Come on, darling. We had it during lunch in 3 hours on Monday evening. You can wait until tomorrow." "No, I cannot." "Well, you'll have to. Bob said he would be here around 8:30, and I should be here when he comes in. If he comes early and I walk in with a just-had-sex look on my face, he might get suspicious and start checking me out, and we don't want that. Come on, Lena. If he's as weak as you say, we can do this in front of him and it won't matter." "I know, love. I can just tell him to go home. and we'll talk about it when I get there. And then I can convince him that we were just joking and trying to prank him, and he'll believe me. But just because I know I can doesn't mean I want to open that particular can of worms. Are you sure we can't quickly run upstairs? I don't want to risk it, my love, but I can relieve your stress. There was a pause, and then the man groaned. Oh God, Lena, you are so good at this. Your mouth is pure magic. I've never been treated so well before. The moaning continued for a minute or two, and then it reached a peak. Mike will be very angry when I tell him that you relieved my stress, and he will have to wait until tomorrow. Maybe not. I thought you said we couldn't today. I said we can't go up to the guest apartment. I didn't say anything about not doing what we just did. How can you do this? Mike will probably arrive only after your husband. What you and I just did didn't take long, baby. I'll introduce you to Bob, and then I'll get up to go to the ladies' room. While you and Bob are talking, I'll sneak in here with Mike to give him some quick relief. God, Lena, you are just a depraved woman. I know, lover, that's why you like me. Are you going to rinse your mouth or kiss your hubby with my taste on your tongue? This won't be the first time he tastes you. You are a devil, Lena. That's what you are. Evil and vicious. Come on, love. We need to get back to the party. It's amazing how quickly love can die. I went from endless love and affection to absolute hatred in a matter of seconds. All this time, I was fighting with myself. Should I knock down the door and then kick ass, or sit back and use what I just learned to make plans? Should I strike while it's hot or wait and find out names, dates, and places? If I lash out at them now, it will be a he said, she said situation in divorce court. I could say I overheard, and she could vehemently deny it. I needed more information. Besides, if I had kicked down the door, I might never have known who Mike was, or even if there were any other men besides Mike and the guy in the next room with Lena. No, in the end, I will still have time to kick some ass. But it won't be that night. I hurried out of the building and into the car until the time came when I told Lena to wait for me. When I entered the ballroom, I saw Lena sitting at a table with 2 couples and 1 man. Lena is 58 inches tall, and the guy she was sitting next to was about 61. So, unless he has very short legs, I guessed he was about 61, with black wavy hair and a thin mustache that allowed me to tell he was a really good-looking person. Even before I approached the table, Lena saw me coming. She stood up and stepped back from the table, opening her arms to embrace me. She moved to kiss me with her wicked mouth, but at the last second I turned my head and accepted the kiss on my cheek. I think I'm sick with something, honey. I don't want to pass it on to you, I said. She agreed and then introduced me to the people at the table. The handsome fellow was named Jack, and when he stood up to shake my hand, I saw that I was close in my guesses. My height is 61, and we were approximately at each other's eye level. This was only important, because I wanted to know his reach when I went after him. We sat down, and I started chatting with my wife's colleagues. I felt that the 2 couples were a little restless, as if they were expecting something to happen. I danced 2 numbers with Lena, and during the second, she whispered in my ear, "This thing that made you sick won't stop you from jumping on my bones today. I've been horny as hell all day just thinking about you." Yes, I have no doubt, I thought. I wanted to say, "No, Lena, I don't think so." But I didn't. I'd never called her Lena like Jack did, and I wasn't ready to do anything to alarm her yet. So I said, "We'll just have to wait and see how things go and how I feel when we get home." Lena didn't know it yet, but she would never have sex with me again. When the music stopped and we returned to the table, there was another man sitting there talking to Jack, and Lena introduced me to him as Mike. He was about 60 inches tall and perhaps 180 pounds. He had soft hands and a weak chin, and I remembered this information. About 10 minutes later, Mike got up to visit the people at another table, and I watched him out of the corner of my eye. I wasn't surprised when I saw him enter the hallway that led to the room Lena was already in with Jack. Apparently, Jack had prepared it while Lena and I were on the dance floor. After a couple of minutes, Lena stood up, kissed me on the cheek, and told me she was going to the restroom. Jack let her walk a few feet away from the table and then asked me what I thought about the Broncos' chances at the Super Bowl. Apparently, Lena had told him I was an avid football fan, and he would use that to keep me occupied while Lena sneaked off to Mike. While I was talking about football with Jack, I kept an eye out of the corner of my eye on the door through which Mike came out, and less than a minute later, Lena entered it. Almost 15 minutes passed before Lena returned to the table, and I continued talking to Jack and pretended not to notice how long she had been gone. After she returned to the table, I danced with her again, and she cuddled up to me. "I'm horny, baby. Very, very horny. Please don't let me down tonight." When we returned to the table, Mike asked Lena to dance, and as they walked onto the floor, I saw a smirk on the face of one of the women at the table as she looked in my direction. I remembered the old cliche, "The husband will be the last to know about this." Mike brought her back, then Jack brought her out, and I saw the 2 women at the table smiling knowingly at each other. I put it away in my memory. If it was common knowledge among the people she worked with, then finding out what I needed would be easy. Lena danced with a few of the people she reported to, and then sat at her boss's desk, talking to him for 15 minutes. When she returned to our table, she whispered, "Okay, lover, they saw, and I danced with those with whom I was supposed to dance. Let's go home, lover. Be ready for me. I really need it." We were in different cars, and I gave her a good head start. I wanted her to be home, undressed, and on the bed when I arrived. This way, she could experience the full effect of what I had planned. I drove slowly to make sure she had time to become what I wanted. When I got home, I rushed upstairs and threw the master bedroom door open to the closet where I faked erupting my bowels. I stayed in the toilet making noises for a few minutes, then went to the sink, flushed the water, and wiped my forehead with a wet rag. Drying my face with a towel, I went into the bedroom and saw Lena lying naked on the bed. "Sorry, baby, I don't know what it is, but I'm not going to give it to you. I'll sleep in the spare bedroom tonight and call the doctor in the morning." I saw that she was angry when I left the room. The next morning, I was up before Lena, sitting at the kitchen table sipping coffee, trying to look sick when she walked into the kitchen. "Do you feel better?" she asked. "Not good. I hardly slept." I looked at my watch. "The doctor's office only opens at 8:30. I'd better call work and let them know that I won't be there today." I reached for the phone while she poured herself a cup of coffee, and then went to get ready for work. "Don't forget that I'll be late today," she said. "We're still working on that damn budget proposal, which should be ready by next Tuesday." "Yeah, sure," I thought, hanging up without calling. After Lena left for work, I got dressed, went to my office, and tidied up the work I couldn't leave unattended. Then I told my secretary that I had a doctor's appointment and would be gone for the rest of the day. I left the office and headed to the public library. I dug through the directories and soon found the addresses and telephone numbers of Jack Woods and Mike Travis. Then, using the library computers, I found information about the company Lena worked for. I found the names, addresses, and telephone numbers of all company officers and all members of the board of directors. I checked the backgrounds of senior officials and the chairman of the board to get an idea of how they might react to the scandal, and was pleased with what I found. If I was right, then even the slightest hint of scandal would make Lena and her two fellow lovers throw everything into the trash. That evening, I parked near Lena's place of work, and when she got out at 10 minutes past 4, I followed her as she drove across town. She pulled into the motel parking lot, got out of the car, and walked up to room 131. She knocked, the door opened, and Mike stepped aside and let her in. 20 minutes later, Jack arrived, got out of the car, and walked towards room 131. I could only assume he was there to attend the budget meeting. I wondered if Lena's company valued the fact that their employees worked on the budget on their own time and at their own expense. I could be wrong. One of them could have submitted an expense report for the meeting. Yes, exactly. I wrote down the make, model, and license plate of Jack's car and drove home. Along the way, I thought about what else I'd learned about Jack and Mike. Both were married, but I couldn't understand whether they were happily married or not. All I could figure out was that none of them were at the office party. I needed to find out more about them, and maybe involve them in my plot to blow the lid on Lena, Jack, and Mike's affairs. I also thought about some things that I hadn't noticed before. For example, Lena always worked late on Mondays and Thursdays. I never doubted her when she told me that Mondays were dragging on because they had to deal with all the problems that arose over the weekend. She worked late on Thursday because that was the day they had to finish all the reports that were due on Friday. Why did I trust her? I was stupid in love when it came to her. I just now realized how stupid I am. I was lying in bed reading when I heard her come home. I turned off the light, put the book aside, and pretended to be asleep. She opened the door, looked in, then closed the door and went into her bedroom. A few minutes later, I heard the shower running. That night, sleep was not easy for me. I lay there looking at the ceiling, trying to figure out how I could destroy all three of them at the same time. It had to be all three of them at once because I didn't want any of them to see that something had happened to the others and take steps to protect themselves. After it's done, it'll let them know who did it, and knowing that they'll know why. Then it dawned on me. I sat down, turned on the light, and picked up the book I was reading. It was a mystery about the murder of a man who was framed. He was convicted based on planted evidence, and a lawyer and private detective frantically tried to prove his innocence before he was executed. This will be enough, I thought, putting the book down and turning off the light. Now that I knew what to do, I fell asleep and slept like a baby. On Friday morning, I told Lena that the doctor had diagnosed me with stomach flu, and that with medication, it should go away. I'm still a little weak, but he says I should be strong enough to go to work on Monday. He doesn't want me to do anything other than relax this weekend. Lena touched my cheek. Rest and gain strength, my love. You will need it. I was left out, and will need to make up for everything. And then she left for work. After getting dressed, I left the house to do more research. By the end of the day, I learned that Jack's wife was a lawyer's secretary, and that she was not at the party because she was out of town visiting her sick mother. Mike's wife sells real estate, and she missed the party because she was trying to close a deal on a $2 million property. Both marriages seemed stable, but I guess that was because neither woman knew what their husbands were doing. I will fix this very soon. After spending a relaxing weekend at home, I told Lena that I felt ready to go to work on Monday. I'm still a little weak, but I should be fine as long as I don't overexert myself. Monday night, I picked Lena up at the same motel again, but it was room 146, and Jack met her at the door and let her inside. 5 minutes later, Mike arrived and entered the room. I wrote down information about Mike's car and drove home. My plan was not without some risk for me. The fact that I was willing to take the risk showed how much I wanted revenge. It was expensive, but if it delivered what I wanted, it would be the best money I've ever spent. Phone calls to friends who had friends who knew people helped me get in touch with the person I needed, and a midnight meeting in a parking lot got me what I needed to get by. The following Sunday I was ready, and when Lena went to work on Monday morning, the decision was made. That evening, I followed Lena back to the motel, and when she and her two lovers were in room 136, I got out of the car and walked to Jack's car. The car was unlocked, so I opened the trunk and put half a pound of marijuana behind the spare tire. Mike's car was locked, so I had to use the Slim Jim I bought from the tool retailer Snap-on to break into the car. I opened the trunk and put a pound of weed in it, then locked the car with an ounce of weed on the back bumper to give the police probable cause to search it. I drove half a block, called the police from a payphone, and reported that there was a drug purchase taking place in motel room 136, then gave the license plates of Lena, Jack, and Mike. They asked my name, and I quickly said, "No way, man, I'm not going to expose myself to a bunch of Colombians," and hung up. I drove to another payphone, called all 3 local TV stations, and gave them the same information I gave the cops. The election had just passed, and the new mayor had campaigned on a war on drugs, and I knew the cops would respond quickly. The television stations knew the same thing, and they would go there to film the story. I drove another block to the 3rd payphone and called Jack and Mike's wives and told them that their husbands were in room 136 at the Seabreeze Motel with a woman. Then I drove back and parked off to the side of the road where I could watch, and so that no one would ask about me. It only took the police 10 minutes to arrive, but it took another half hour to organize everything. A couple of patrol cars showed up first, then a SWAT van followed by 2 unmarked cars full of plainclothes detectives. By the time the police were ready, news reporters were already on site, and television vans had already arrived and were positioned. I watched as 2 SWAT officers broke down the motel room door with a battering ram and allowed 4 other SWAT officers to enter with their guns drawn. God, I wish I could be a fly on the wall and see Lena's face when the door collapses. 3 minutes later, Lena, Mike, and Jack were led out of the room in handcuffs. Mike and Jack were wearing shorts, but Lena was naked with a blanket draped over her shoulders. I pressed the preset button on my cell phone and called the president of Lena's company. When he answered, I said, "Did you know that 3 of your middle managers are running the drug trade out of your corporate office?" I told him who they were and what was going on at the Seabreeze, even as we were talking. After making the same call to all 5 board members, I then drove home. When the cops searched Jack and Mike's cars, they found the planted weed and an ounce of cocaine in Lena's purse under the front seat of her car. They would have found another well, not knowing what Jack and Mike's wives looked like. I don't know if they were in the crowd that had gathered or not, but I really hope they were there. This story was shown on the 10 o'clock news on channels 2 and 7. I laughed when the Channel 7 presenter said, "Today, Mayor Jones began making good on his campaign promise. Police took down a large drug ring operating out of one of the city's motels. There's no news yet on how many were seized." Footage of 3 arrested drug lords was shown, and we were called upon to follow the latest news. I turned off the TV, turned off the phone, and went to bed. I laughed when Lena asked me to mortgage the house so she could post bail. She eventually talked her parents into putting up the money, and when she got out of jail and returned home, she found all the locks had been changed, and all her belongings were stacked in boxes in the driveway. "Why are you doing this to me?" she asked. "Because you are a fallen woman, and I don't want anything to do with you anymore." "But you don't understand. If you would just let me explain." I got all the explanation I needed when I saw you being escorted out of a motel room naked on the news. I closed the door in her face. I helped her father load all her stuff into the U-Haul, but I refused to talk to him about his daughter. Lena called 2 or 3 times a day, but I never spoke to her. When she showed up at my office one day, I asked security to escort her out of the building. It so happened that she, Mike, and Jack were laid off in their company, and all 3 didn't fare too well when it came to their legal troubles. Although they were first-time offenders, due to the mayor's anti-drug stance, they did not receive the probation that many other first-time offenders receive. They didn't help themselves by continuing to protest their innocence, even when they were caught with the goods. Lena seriously harmed herself when she demanded a blood test to prove there were no drugs in her system. The test showed she was as clean as snow, allowing prosecutors to argue that this was evidence that the drugs found in her purse and car were intended for sale, not personal use. Because the mayor wanted to show immediate results from his war on drugs, the three were offered a deal: 1 year in prison and 2,000 hours of community service. If they behaved well, they could be released after 9 months. Their lawyer told them they would be fried, so they agreed to the deal. While Lena was behind bars, I filed for divorce, as did Jack's wife and Mike's wife. All three served their time, and when they got out, I kept an eye on them. When the time came, I went to see Mike. I later learned that he had 3 broken ribs and an arm when he arrived at the hospital emergency room. I suppose he could have pressed charges against me, but he didn't. Maybe he felt guilty for what he did. Jack and Lena lived together, and one evening I caught them leaving a bar. After I finished with Jack, I turned to Lena and said, "Not bad for a weakling, huh? Remember the Christmas party where you pleasured Jack in that little back room? Do you remember what he said? If he's as weak as you say, then we can get away with it right in front of him and get away with it. Remember, Lena?" I saw her face change as everything fell into place, and I laughed. "That's right, Lena. This weakling took revenge for your betrayal. Better call an ambulance for your boyfriend. He doesn't look that hot." She was still looking at me as I got into the car and drove away. Thank you for listening to the story. Now here is another exciting story for you to read. Mark and Sandra entered the bustling restaurant, looking around the room expectantly, eager to reunite with their families for a long-awaited dinner. As they entered, they noticed Paul and Lucy, Sandra's children, sitting in a quiet and secluded booth with Lizzie, Mark's daughter. Assuming that their spouses must have been out for a while or were late, they approached the table with smiles, unaware of the unexpected conversation that awaited them. Mark smoothly slid into the booth, pulled out a chair, and made himself comfortable. Sandra followed suit, her eyes briefly scanning their surroundings before joining him. Unfazed by the unusual circumstances, they took their seats, ready to enjoy the joyful evening together, completely unaware of the shocking revelation that was about to occur. Mark pulled out a chair and plopped down into the booth, greeting the group with a cheerful, "Hello, kids!" Sandra, looking around the restaurant, followed suit and pulled out her own chair before asking, "Where are Jim and Sarah?" Paul intervened, explaining, "We asked them to give us some time alone with you." Sandra's smile grew wider. "Any important news? I think we should be flattered that you wanted to tell us first." Lizzie replied with a serious expression, "I think it was more because we wanted to share some things that we had learned." Mark, noticing the change in tone, asked worriedly, "You all speak so seriously. What's happening? Is everything fine?" His gaze shifted to his daughter. Lizzie was silent, and Lucy, seemingly unfazed by the seriousness of the conversation, said to Sandra, her mother, "Pineapple fudge." Sandra felt a lump in her throat, leaving her speechless for a moment. Her face paled, becoming like a ghostly sheet as she tried to make sense of the unfolding conversation. Mark, completely confused by the sudden turn of events, responded with a puzzled expression and confusion evident in his voice. "Pineapple fudge? What are you talking about?" Lizzie, taking the opportunity to shed light on the situation, turned to her father with a leading question. "Good question, Dad. Sandra, do you want to explain to him here?" Lucy, Sandra's daughter, intervened again, adding a touch of sarcasm to her words. "Yes, Mom. Would you like to explain to my biological father what pineapple fudge means?" Sandra, struggling with the shock of being faced with such a revelation, muttered, trying to collect her thoughts. "I'm waiting. How are you? Where did you hear about pineapple fudge?" Paul, keeping a straight face, intervened, shedding light with a hint of accusation in his voice. "From your diaries, of course. Where do you write everything down, right? This is your secret code for today I had sex with a man who is not my husband, but is considered his best friend, isn't it?" His gaze shifted from his mother to Mark and back, his eyes reflecting indignation not particularly hidden in his voice. Lucy, feeling the weight of this revelation, expressed a bittersweet feeling as she spoke. She quietly squeezed Paul's hand, which she held under the table. Her gaze moved to Lizzie, and she added with genuine tenderness, "And I knew and loved Lizzie all my life," also gently squeezing Lizzie's hand. But then her tone changed, filled with contempt, as she turned her attention to Mark. "But it's still a little shocking to hear that we have the same biological father." The weight of her words hung in the air, emphasizing the deep sense of betrayal and resentment she felt towards Mark and Sandra, whose actions had destroyed the foundation and trust of both families. Paul, with a mixture of annoyance and disappointment in his voice, told Mark the truth that had finally come out. "Did you really think that we would never know? In the world of DNA testing, genetic diseases, and ancestry research, it is clear that sooner or later this will come to light." Mark paused, realizing the weight of Paul's words, becoming defensive. "Look, guys, we're very sorry that you had to find out about this, but it shouldn't change anything. Lucy, Paul, I'm still the same Uncle Mark you've known all your life." His attempt to reassure them seemed weak in the face of shattered trust. Continuing his explanations, Mark pleaded, "Jim and Sarah don't need to know about this. This will only harm them and will not bring any benefit." In his quest to protect the stability of his life, Mark failed to perceive the profound impact that this revelation had already had on their family dynamics. Jim's voice cut through the tension, hitting Mark and Sandra as they realized their missing partners had approached the table undetected. "It's a little late for that, old friend. You are about 3 months late." Jim pulled out a chair and sat down, the weight of his words hanging thick in the air, emphasizing the depth of betrayal. Sarah joined them at the table, her face showing anger and disappointment. "Besides, Jim found out first and told me before we jointly decided to tell the kids," she added. Sandra's words, laced with sharp acidity, now directed at Jim. "And now, after our weekend with Jim, I really don't think no benefit is a good enough assessment." She grinned at Sandra, her face a mixture of indignation and mockery. "Sandra, I can't understand what was going on in your unfortunate head. Have you traded your Michelin-starred chocolate ganache for a stale, dried-out piece of pineapple fudge? I'm glad the kids insisted on extra time because I could barely walk here from our hotel room." Mark's shock quickly turned to anger as he realized the truth, his voice trembling with a mixture of disbelief and indignation. "Wait, you and Jim? Are you having an affair?" Lucy, although angry, could not help but laugh bitterly at the irony of Mark's reaction. "Are you really upset about this? Are you being too hypocritical?" There was slight sarcasm in her words, emphasizing the double standards. Sandra, who was gradually regaining her composure, intervened in a calm but decisive tone. Wait. If you two were together, then we're even. Jim, you got your revenge." She looked at the accusing glances of her children and husband. "Now we have to figure out how to move forward and work on rebuilding both of our families." There was a glimmer of determination in her eyes as she took on the role of a leader. Sandra's voice grew stronger as she continued, determination guiding her words. "This shouldn't change anything. Mark and I will end our affair, and you will both end yours. We can all get through this." There was conviction in those words, as if she was determined to forge a path to healing and restoration in the face of broken trust. Jim's eyes flashed with a mixture of shock and intense anger as he listened to Sandra's attempt to level the playing field. His voice dripped with bitterness as he replied, "Well, that may seem fair to some, my dear. It would be so if it weren't completely idiotic." He paused, his anger simmering. The words poured out into a stream of pain from betrayal. "You've been having an affair with that sack of shit for 20 years. You conceived a child together and told me that he was mine all this time. Sarah and I were friends, close friends, but we never did anything inappropriate. How the hell does that make us equal?" Sandra's confusion was evident when she replied, "Sarah just said that you spent the weekend together." Sarah's mocking tone cut through the air as she retorted, "We did. And it was magical, honey. It turns out that at our age, not all guys suck so much." She grinned, clearly enjoying the opportunity to tease her husband. Lucy chimed in playfully, interjecting, "Mom." If Sandra had been in a more stable frame of mind, she would have noticed that her daughter called the other woman Mom. But in her confusion, she did not notice it. "She'll figure it out soon enough." Jim's voice grew firmer as he continued, a hint of triumph in his words. "But you're wrong, Sandra. We never had an affair because by the time I touched Sarah intimately for the first time, we had both already filed official divorce papers. You were too busy on your weekend business trip for us to bother serving you." He raised his hand, pointing to the man standing at the door. The atmosphere became tense. The unknown man reacted to Jim's gesture and approached the table. He wasted no time in conveying his message in a cool and formal voice. "Sandra Davis, Mark Willis, you've been served." He handed each of them a brown manila envelope, the contents of which were no secret. The man then stepped back, taking out his camera to capture the moment before nodding to Jim and walking away, leaving the culprits dazed and confused. The table fell silent as Mark and Sandra exchanged glances, frantically trying to comprehend the sudden turn of events. The weight of these envelopes completely changed their lives, adding another layer of uncertainty to a turbulent situation. Sandra's composure shook, her voice trembled with despair, and tears streamed down her face. "I don't want a divorce. This is not the way it should have happened. Mark and I don't like each other, but that didn't mean anything. I love you, Jim. I've always loved only you." Her words were filled with pain as she begged her husband, hoping to save their broken relationship. Sandra looked from Jim to Lucy and Paul, her children, her voice breaking with emotion. "Lucy, Paul, tell your father that this shouldn't destroy our family." Her prayers were addressed to the children, hoping they would help bridge the gap between their parents. Mark, who sat silently, seemed completely broken, his face reflecting the enormous pain he was experiencing. He seemed lost, unable to find the right words to express the depth of his remorse and regret. In a silent act of solidarity and support, Jim, Sarah, Paul, Lucy, and Lizzie placed their hands on the table, intertwining their fingers. Their united display underscored their commitment to each other, acknowledging the challenges ahead and giving each other the strength and support needed to face the future. Jim's stern voice carried through the room, drawing attention and signaling that it was time for Sandra to listen. The weight of the decision made by all five was obvious. "Sandra, I think it's time for you to shut up and listen. The five of us have been discussing how to proceed for a month now. We've got all our ducks in a row, and as far as I'm concerned, none of this is subject to revision. Lizzie intervened in a decisive tone, confirming the unity of their decision. We thought long and hard about it separately, and then we leaned on each other to decide how to proceed. We are unanimous on this. She glanced at Paul and Lucy, appreciating their collective efforts. I'll just add that the three of us came up with this, and your spouses initially tried to dissuade us. Paul, speaking with a sense of maturity and determination, emphasized the gravity of the situation. My little sister may be the youngest at the table, but she's an adult now and has a wise head on her shoulders. She was directly affected by this, so we asked her to tell you how things will unfold. Lucy, sniffling but gathering her strength, spoke with a mixture of pain and determination. In short, it is so. She turned to Mark, her voice firm and unyielding. Mark, you provided your seed, but you never were and never will be my father. Her gaze returned to Sandra, her expression hardening. Sandra, you have been my mother all my life. Not as good a mother as my father was, but still my mother. Well, it ends tonight. From now on, you and I have no relationship. I don't want to talk to you, read your messages, or have any contact at all. This may change in the future, but I wouldn't bet on it. If this happens, it will be my decision. I'm sure you're against it, but I want none of you to ever contact me again. Paul, looking at his broken and almost catatonic mother, shared Lucy's feelings. The same applies to me. Lizzie, determined and adamant, added her voice. And to me too. Sarah, calmly but firmly, touched on the practical aspect of their decision. Jim and I have a common lawyer whose details are indicated in the envelopes you are holding in your hands. All contacts must now be made only through a lawyer. There was an awkward silence at the table as the weight of what had been said dawned on everyone. The path forward had been charted, and the consequences of their choices would undoubtedly change their lives. Jim, after a significant pause, allowed the silence to deepen, giving Sandra and Mark time to realize the gravity of what had been revealed. Breaking the silence, he moved on to the next question. All 8 grandparents were informed about this today. He turned his gaze to Sandra. Your parents, he nodded, and yours, pointing to Mark, didn't do anything wrong, and we don't want to erase them from the lives of their grandchildren. His words conveyed concern and attentiveness, as he always respected and loved his relatives. Jim continued, emphasizing all the conditions. However, their continued participation depends on whether they accept this situation. They must not pass on any messages from you to the children, and will not give you updates on any aspect of our lives. He made it clear that the boundaries he set for Sandra and Mark also applied to their parents. While they may maintain a relationship with you, this should in no way interfere with us or affect our family dynamics. Mark, your mom and dad are really excited to get to know their new granddaughter, and we will definitely support Lucy in getting to know them. At the same time, it is not surprising that this does not change anything for my parents. They love Lucy more than anything in the world, and nothing will ever change that. The once unified family structure had been forever changed, and the new boundaries would change the relationship not only between Sandra, Mark, and the children, but also between their parents and grandchildren. Sarah entered. We're not leaving. This is not New York or Los Angeles. We may run into each other in a restaurant or on the street. Her tone was filled with anger, a sense of warning, and a clear boundary with palpable restraint. Sarah continued, determination evident in her voice. I would strongly advise both of you to pretend that you don't know me. It took all my self-control not to spank you both here tonight. The depth of her anger was obvious, and it was clear that maintaining composure in future confrontations might prove difficult. Then Lizzie's voice took on a more positive, albeit forced tone, and it was her turn. But in a way, Sandra, you were right. Her words hung in the air, attracting the attention of everyone at the table. A noticeable shift occurred when Lizzie addressed Aunt Sandra, abandoning her usual term of endearment and simply calling her Sandra. It was a subtle but significant sign of strained relations. She paused briefly before delivering the unexpected news, her tone still laced with a mixture of emotions. I want to share good news. Actually, 2 pieces of good news. Paul and I are getting married, and it will happen soon because in about 7 months, your first grandchild will join us. There was a moment of joy in Sandra's eyes when she heard the news, but the weight of the previous discussion quickly cooled her. Likewise, the hopeful expression on Mark's face faltered as he realized the complex implications of the current situation. Paul, pushing aside any positivity, spoke bluntly, his voice filled with a mixture of disappointment and determination. Lizzie and I talked about how your betrayal affected our relationship. It's weird as hell that we now share a half-sister, but at the end of the day, we were inseparable from the very first day we met at playgroup. There was a hint of bitterness in his words, but also a determined refusal to allow their parents' actions to destroy the bond between the children. While it will always be overshadowed by the fact that it was where you first met, There's no reason to let your terrible behavior ruin our relationship. Lizzie continued. The child appeared unexpectedly, and it happened earlier than we had originally planned, but we always wanted to have children. There was sincerity in her words, reflecting a deep desire for stability and love amidst the chaos. Her voice grew stronger. Our parents, the two that remain, are very supportive of our decision to start a family now. Lizzie highlighted the support they received from Jim and Sarah, who were by their side during this crucial moment. Their parents' unwavering support provided a glimmer of hope amidst all the turmoil, a reminder that there were still foundations of love and caring to rely on. But no matter what you may think about how things will change in the future, know this, Paul stated in an unwavering tone. You will not attend our wedding. You will not be present at the birth of your first grandchild or any subsequent ones. You won't spoil them, play with them, or babysit them to give us a day off. His words painted a picture of restrictions. He looked at Sandra, a mixture of emotions showing on his face before continuing. You won't get their photos, hear their first words, or catch them when they fall. The weight of these words was palpable, illustrating the deep loss both sides would feel. He looked at Jim, and gratitude and respect flashed in his eyes. Mom, he turned to Sarah, trying a new way of addressing her for the first time. The barely noticeable change in address carried deep meaning, signaling a change in their relationship. Paul's voice softened as he realized the burden that would now fall on Jim and Sarah. Mom and Dad will have to take on the burden of being the only grandparents. Despite the seriousness of the conversation, Sarah couldn't help but smile at the thought of becoming a grandmother, and at the fact that Paul called her Mom. Having dealt the final blow, Paul turned to Mark. Mark, you won't take Lizzie to the altar. That honor will go to Dad. Frankly, you've already given up your right to give her away. There was a strong determination in Jim's voice as he raised the issue of making these changes widely known. Sarah and I didn't do anything wrong, and therefore we do not intend to hide the reasons for the breakdown of our marriages from friends and acquaintances. Lucy continued, barely audible. I want people to know. I want people to know why I completely cut you out of my life, Mom, so you can be judged harshly and not me. Her desire for others to understand the gravity of the decision reflected her need for approval and appreciation. I don't want you at my graduation next month. Yes, this is a public event, and I cannot prevent you from attending. Lucy's voice grew stronger, containing a mixture of determination and concern for her reputation. But I've earned the respect of my teachers and my friends' parents, and I don't want to lose that by spitting on you if you show up. Lizzie chimed in with a wry smile, bringing a touch of humor to the tense atmosphere. Unless, of course, before that, Sandra, your mother hasn't decorated you yet. There was a hint in her words that if Mark and Sandra did not listen to what was said, the consequences could be serious and physical. All five rose from their seats, leaving Sandra and Mark alone with their destroyed world. Lastly, Jim began decisively, his gaze focused on his cheating ex-spouses. I had a loving friendship with Sarah for 20 years. It won't take much effort to turn this into a loving relationship. He pointed to Sarah, acknowledging the depth of their connection. I've already fallen in love with her just because of her support over the past 3 months. He looked straight at Sandra and Mark. Betrayal won't break me, and I won't let it break Sarah. There was a decisive challenge in his words, a refusal to give in to the pain he was causing. You may have been laughing at us behind our backs for the last 20 years, but for the next 50, I'll be laughing with Sarah. He emphasized the joy and happiness that awaited him and Sarah, free from the burden of a broken relationship. Turning to Sarah, Jim softened his tone. Sarah, I fell in love with you. It's too early to expect you to feel the same, but I want you to give me a chance. There was a plea in his words, a request for patience and the opportunity to build something new. And when you do, Jim continued, his voice growing stronger, I want us to commit our future to each other before God and our children. Our partners did not take their vows seriously, but we did not change them, and you can be sure that our attitude to our future vows will be just as deep and heartfelt. When Jim first spoke to Sarah, it was quite possible that it was too early for Sarah to experience the same deep feelings for him that he had for her. But looking at her tear-stained smile, it was obvious to anyone that by this time, she already felt the same way. Jim and Sarah hugged each other and followed their 3 children out, united and ready to forge a new path together, driven by love and determination to find happiness among the ruins. Sandra and Mark were left to deal with the consequences of their actions. Thank you for watching this heartfelt story of love, betrayal, and redemption. We hope it resonated with you and maybe even offered a bit of inspiration. If you enjoyed the video, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe to our channel, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss any of our future stories. We'd love to hear your thoughts and reactions in the comments below. Share your own experiences or let us know what other kinds of stories you'd like to see. Thanks again for your support. Until next time, take care and stay tuned for more amazing content.